everybody, welcome along to episode 61 of Percussion Discussion. Hope you're all well and happy out there. Please check out our social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course our world famous YouTube channel. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, that would really help us. So thank you for that. It's very kind of you. If you prefer to hear our conversations on the go, then they are all available in podcast form. You can find those on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts. On to today's guest. We are firmly back in the Legends Lounge once more. A gentleman who has not only played for the Kinks, he has played for Argent, he's played for a plethora of other artists as well. He's an author, he's owned his own drum shop, he's invented certain types of drums, which you'll hear in the interview, and he's a wonderful guy, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome Mr. Bob Henrit.
You're very welcome. I mean, I actually enjoy it. I'm good at talking about myself, I'm afraid.
Well, I'm glad to hear it, to be honest. That's the whole idea. So it's great to have you here. Obviously, we're in at the end of, hopefully at the end, we've just been talking of these rather strange times with COVID and everything. And you were saying it's upset your plans. So have you managed to do anything at all through the last sort of 18 months, Bob?
Well, funnily enough, my son and I, Joss, actually sat in the garden and put two kits up, and filmed it. And what we did, the bedrock of it was hold your head up. Mm-hmm. So we were playing bum diddy bum diddy bum diddy bum, but that was what we were playing. And then we'd both be doing that, and then I would shout out flats in Dagenham, and we would play flats in Dagenham. So and then I'd shout out the black cat whittles in the white cat's eye, and we'd go straight into that, and then we get back to hold your head up. And we did shagga boom and boom shagga and all those things, the obvious things. But it's a really good way to have a drum solo, because you just have to shout out the mnemonic, and there you are, you're doing it. So and that's on the internet somewhere. I haven't seen it for a while. But so to answer your question, no, but I've done a hell of a lot of writing.
Yeah.
And I get up in the morning and I sit at the computer and I write something. Now, before, in the days of International Musician and when rhythm was in its heyday, I'd write for them. And then I started writing for Mike Dolbear. And so anyway, I've been getting up and writing just for the heck of it, just to keep my brain ticking over. Mm. So one of the things that I've written is, I'm sure you've seen it before, and I'd like to think it was my idea, but it's Desert Island snare drum. Mm. So which of all the snare drums you've got or have would you like to have on a desert island? So I started with that, and then I did favorite hotels and favorite gigs and favorite studios and favorite everything really, and favorite vehicles, including Thames Traders and all those things that we had when we began. And it's been quite fun. It's been a lot of fun, and it's good to sort of clear out the cobwebs in your mind. I have an autobiography out, and that really is clearing out your mind, because in my case, it goes back to the 50s.
Yeah. And
it goes back to the mid 50s where I first started playing. And then it starts including Adam Faith, of course, and Cliff Richard, who was my next door neighbor, believe it or not, when we were growing up. So it's all of that. And it's an interesting book, I think, but I would say that, wouldn't I? So I decided I was going to write one about favorite guitars I had sat behind, because you and I have sat behind a lot of guitars. Yes. We haven't sat in front of them, we've sat behind them. Yeah. And we've seen the back of them. So so I started off doing that, and then I moved on. I mean, some of the excesses of the hotel era were talked about, but it's not published yet. So I'm probably not going to get sued yet.
You mentioned the Desert Island snare drum thing. Which would be yours, Bob? Because you've probably got quite a few of them, I'm guessing.
you know what? I haven't anymore, Matt. What I did, when we lived in Winchmore Hill, the old house, I had, may I never get off this bike, 55 snare drums in the loft and 35 drum kits. And I can't tell you how many cymbals were there. Now, that's a health hazard, you know, that right there. So you have to be very careful where you put them, otherwise they'll fall through the floor into the bedrooms. So I woke up one morning thinking, I've got all these drums, they're up in the loft, nobody can see them except me. And it's selfish. I'm being very selfish, and they're not in the public domain, if that's the right idea. They're not there. Nobody's seeing them except me. And I'm not the only one who's been selfish, because Alan Buckley has.
Yes.
Do you know Sir Alan?
Yeah.
Well, you can't get in to see his drums because there's too many of them and you can't get in the door. So anyway, so I called up Lou Dias at Supreme.
Yep.
Said, Lou, I've got more drums here than you could shake a stick at. What do you want? What would you think I should do with them? He said, I'll come round and have a look. So anyway, in the end, he came round and took them all away. So, and they all found their way, interesting enough. I mean, I'm hoping that that collectors will be interested in what I'm talking about, but there was so much there, and I was so selfish that I mean, I had delectable stuff. Every time I went to America with the Kinks, it was too easy. I'd hit the drum shops, or I'd hit the mum and pop music shops, or I'd hit the pawn shops, and PAWN.
Yes,
and, of course. And I'd hit them and I'd find a load of great stuff. So I'd like to think that there's nothing I haven't had. Of course, that's a ridiculous statement, but there's nothing that I really wanted that I haven't had. So to cut to the chase, Lou Dias came round, took them all away, and it was quite a relief, really, because the roof wasn't going to fall in anymore. and they all found their way out into the world, and I'd go to drum shows and I'd see them. So it wasn't like they were lost forever. And then I was doing the Chicago Drum Show, and my role with Dave Mattox was talking about the British invasion. And do you know about that? Should I explain it? I'll explain it. The British invasion is, we listened to American music and stole it, and often got it wrong, because in those, when we were stealing, we couldn't see how it was played. There was nothing to show us. There was no TV. There was not TV that would let you see how it was done. So things like Peggy Sue, for example, we got wrong. And it wasn't until I played with the Crickets until 1962 that I was talking to Jerry Allison at the Albert Hall. Talk about name dropping. There we are playing there, and I watched what Jerry was doing, and he was playing a paradiddle. Well, of course it's a paradiddle. Everybody knows that now, but we didn't then. No. So we were hammering away hand to hand, single strokes, and it never sounded right. It just didn't. But we then exported it back to America, and everybody loved it in America, because it was being played by English geezers. They thought we all came from Liverpool, and of course we didn't. Not all of us. No. And so we would be playing what we thought it was, and we had it wrong. I mean, one that really is an interesting one is Knock on Wood, and I hope you can hear this. You know, I have played that to death, and I put more drum fills in the middle or in the beginning than enough. You know, ba 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 da dum bum, ba ba da 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 do da da ra. That's how I played it.
Yeah.
And of course, Al Jackson Jr. didn't. He simply didn't.
Very sparse.
Yeah. Oh well, the interesting thing is bass drums on 1 and 3 all the way through that, and the one big mistake that anybody makes is that they play double beats. It doesn't go like that. It goes So it's just a downbeat. So we sent it all back to them, and they loved it, and they couldn't get enough of it. And there were these geezers with funny voices or funny accents, funny haircuts, and who all came from Liverpool, and so that was how we got a foothold. So Bobby Elliott and all those guys, and Dave Clark, and plus the Beatles and the Stones, really began to make it because of their because of the way they were playing, as if we had it right. And there's loads of instances of that. So anyway, there I am in Chicago talking about the British invasion, and we let slip. Actually, I'd like to say that Mattox let it slip, but somehow we blurted out that Dave Clark didn't play on his records, and this auditorium was packed with proper drummers like Steve Smith. I mean, these were proper drummers,
yep.
and you could have heard a pin drop, and of course Dave didn't play on his records. Somebody else did. It was Bobby Graham, but Dave was shrewd enough to be in the control room producing them and making money. So you probably don't know this, but he's exceedingly rich, is Dave Clark.
All right, okay. I didn't
So
know.
that's where anyway. So back to bloody snare drums. So I did my chat. We did a round table, me, Dave Mattox, and various other guys. We did my chat, and then it was time to sign the new book, or the book that was out called Banging On. So this geezer came up to me and he said, "What was your favorite snare drum?" I said, "Well, it's a Ludwig Acrolite, actually." I said, "I've had lots of 400s and they do it, but if you're having a problem in the studio and not getting the sound, then it's not a 400 that's going to get the sound for you. It's an Acrolite, because an Acrolite is much lighter. Well, it's a bit lighter." And anyway, so this guy came up to me with, he had a book that he'd bought, and he wanted me to sign it. And he said, "So the Acrolite was really your favorite drummer? My favorite drummer?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "So have you got one?" I said, "No, not anymore. It was stolen." And he said, "Oh, that's a shame," and walked off. 10 minutes later, he's back in the queue with something behind his back. And he said, "I was taking on board what you said, and I decided that you deserve another Acrolite." And he brought out this Acrolite that was behind his back. And it was an Acrolite with a Keystone badge. It was everything you would want, everything. And so I didn't know what to say. And the only time before that anybody had really offered me a snare drum was Keith Moon. And Mooney had a snare drum called a DRB Special, which was a Gretsch. And nobody knows who DRB was. Nobody's been able to pin it down. Maxwell and all those guys have been trying, but nobody's managed it. So Mooney offered me a snare drum, and he said, "Dear boy," he said, "I've got something for you." And I was in his dressing room in, oh blimey, we were in Holland, and the Argent were on, and the Eagles were on, and the Who were on, of course. So I went into the dressing room, and Mooney is sitting in his armchair, and he's got this leather armchair which had a flight case, and it went everywhere with him. So he's sitting in it, and down by the side is a crate of Remy. He said, "Dear boy, I've got these are for me, but this one's for you." And he passed over a bottle of Remy. And then he said, "Oh, also I've got something else here." And he picked up one of these DRB specials. He said, "I think you should have one of these." I said, and I was embarrassed. I said, "Keith, I can't." He said, "No, you must." I said, "I can't do it." Anyway, in the end, I didn't do it, and have regretted it ever since.
Oh dear. Oh, what a lovely gesture, though.
Oh, it was great. Yeah, he was crazy. He came round to, when I had the drum shop, we had, now you don't see this anymore, but there were triple yellow lines outside the drum shop. Now, which means you definitely don't park there, unless you're Keith Moon with a roller, in which case you do. So Mooney used to turn up at sort of lunchtime on a Friday, and he'd park the roller, and I would be forced to sit in with him, listening to Who tracks that they'd been putting down and drinking Remy. Now that he used to drink scotch, but the doctor told him that he would survive longer if he drank brandy. So he moved over to Remy. So he said, "Dear boy, I've got something for you." And he opened the boot of the roller, which was copious as they are. It was full of snare drums. There probably were 20 snare drums. He said, dear boy, I've got, these are for you. I said, I can't take these, Keith. He said, no, you must. In the end, I managed to wriggle out of it. And so he was one of the illustrious people who came to Drum Store, which was a wonderful time. I mean, it really, really was. And by then, I'd been to so many American drum shops, and I knew what it took to be a really good drum shop, or one that I liked. And I figured if I liked it, then it must be all right for everybody else. So that was the beginning of Drum Store. And it went on for, I think, 6 or 7 years. And then I hope nobody's going to get offended, but then punk came along, and punks didn't want to buy anything. Well, they did, but they wanted secondhand. Yeah. And they'd say, and have you got any secondhand drumsticks? Got any secondhand drum heads and all that? And one guy came in, I said, what's the name of your group? He said, we're the Four Skins. Do you get it? I said, I think I do. I think I see where you're going with that.
Oh,
they were skinheads, of course. I probably should have mentioned that. So that, to answer your question, is my favorite. But I've got Mapex, and they all sound great. I mean, I think there's an element of it's the player as much as anything, or not as much as anything, but it's important that, and there are really cheap and cheerful drums made in Taiwan that work in certain situations, you know, the 50 quid versions, or maybe even less.
Yeah.
But they somehow, there's something about them that works. So I have had drums, and every time collectible drums, every time we went to America, I would buy something and stick it in with the drums that were coming home.
Yeah.
And if I was lucky, I got away with it.
Wow. Well, tell me, Bob, how did you manage having the shop and, you know, having touring and recording commitments? How did that work out for you?
Well, with great difficulty. It really was difficult, because I was away up with Don McLean for 6 months in America, and so I wasn't looking after the shop. Somebody else was, and it was well looked after, but it wasn't easy to do that at the same time. And as far as recording was concerned, the marquee was along the road, and every now and again we'd get a producer coming into the shop, running into the shop, pulling his head off, or trying to pull his head off. Have you got any drummers in here? And we say, yes, it's a drum shop. This is where we come. So he'd say, can anybody do a session? I said, yeah, all of us. I said, what do you want? So he said, well, I'm working with a punk band, and they answer, and the drummer's done one take and he won't do any more. He said, if you couldn't get it right in the first take, then that's it, tough. So one of us, me or any one of the others, would go along and play. And we never knew who we were playing with. I mean, it could have been absolutely anybody. We could have been playing on something really cool for all we knew. So that was very difficult to keep all the balls in the air. But I think we managed it, and it was a great time. And I mean, I regret nothing, as Edith Piaf once said. I think she did. Not to me, though.
I mean, so your shop was that on Wardour Street then, Bob? Right. Okay.
It wasn't cheap.
No, I bet.
Well, but it was a great place to be. And it was right next to the Ship, which was a pub, which is always a good thing to put a drum shop next to. Well, it was a good thing to put our drum shop next to, that's for sure. Because
there's always been a real social element to a drum shop. There's very few of them these days. One of my favorites, and Paul won't mind me saying this, was electro music up in Doncaster. Oh yeah,
me too. I used to love going up.
Yeah, and always a warm welcome from Paul and the sadly departed Scott. You know,
Scott. Yeah, a few jokes, of course.
And there is always that social element. You know, whether you're going to buy something or not. Some like that. Some, you know, obviously everyone's rather if you buy something at least to make it worthwhile. But was it the same back, you know, in the sort of mid to late 70s?
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was meant to be a place that people wanted to come to. Of course, we wanted to sell stuff, and because we were, blimey, the rent was a fortune there. So we had to sell a few. And when we It was predicated on somebody coming round from one of the record companies with a check under their arm, metaphorically, and coming in and buying a drum kit. And that's what we needed to do.
Yeah.
And one or two of those a week kept us in business. But when the punks came along, whilst they did a lot of good stuff, because they opened up gigs that had closed, or they played anywhere. Whereas most of us had got a bit flash, and most musicians would play only where they wanted to play. Yeah. They wouldn't play in a school or a youth club or anything. But when we began, that was it. That's what we did. So the punks didn't care where they played, and it was a very interesting time.
Yeah.
I was talking to Rat Scabies. Rat's in this new film, which I've got a film out.
I've seen it, yes.
Oh, you have? Right. Well, Rat's in it. And yes. Rat used to come in Drum Store. And I used to refuse to call him Rat. I used to call him Chris, which is his name.
Yeah.
So when we filmed him, I said, I'm still not calling you Rat. I said, by the way, why were you called Rat? He said, well, here's the story. We were all on the dole. And if we'd used our real names, the dole would have realized what was going on, and they would have stopped our dole.
As simple as that.
That's all that would have been all it took. Isn't that interesting?
Oh,
well, I think it is anyway.
Well, look, hey, speaking of the film in question on Netflix is Count Me In. And it's only been out a few weeks already.
Last week.
Yeah,
last week. Yes.
Smash. It's done ever so well, hasn't it?
It is, yeah. Well, it's entertaining. I mean, that's the point. It's got to be entertaining. Of course, you could make a film with Buddy Rich and Gene Krupa and all those. I mean, and it would be interesting.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't interest people who didn't know who Buddy Rich was or Gene Krupa or any of that lot. So it's not dedicated to modern people, but it's, I think I'm the oldest person in it. As a matter of fact, I know I'm the oldest person in it.
How old's Nick Mason?
Oh yeah, right. I see what you did there.
Yeah.
I see what you did there. Yeah, Nick Mason is, I think he's about a year older than me, or he's a few months, yeah.
I got you out of that one then, you see.
Yeah, you did, yeah. I mean, Nick actually has a drum shop, of course, as you know.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if I should tell you this, but he came and he said, how am I going to play this? How am I going to make this work? I said, go in a lot. Make sure you're there.
Yeah. Well, Nick,
people want to see Nick.
Of course they do.
And he's the figurehead.
Yeah.
Of course, Nick's so busy, he's on the road. I'm not sure if Nick's in a tribute band as well to Pink Floyd.
He's got
Pacey's in a tribute band.
Yes. Of course, Nick has his Saucer Full of Secrets band, doesn't he? Which is
he does, yeah.
Yeah. So, well, Nick's actually been on my show as well. Right. I'm very. In fact, you're the. I think. Who else has been on it? I was really pleased to see so many people on Count Me In. I think, oh yes, I've got Bob coming up. I've had Nick McBrain, Nick Mason, and Chad Smith out of the show so far. So.
Right. Well, Chad is hilarious. I mean, he's a very funny guy, but he's very knowledgeable about us lot.
Yeah.
Which it's not his strength, but he knows everything about it. And I wasn't flabbergasted. I was pleased that he did. But he knows where it came from, yeah. And that's what we were all doing in the early '60s and the late '50s.
Absolutely. When was it filmed, Bob?
Oh, it was. We started it before the pandemonium, pandemic, before that happened, and we were caught up in that. But we managed to get it done, and it's. I think it is a credit to us. I think we've made a jolly good job of it, and I'm not sure there's another one in me. Another film in me, but I wanted to I would like to have made a film about the drum, like you spoke about the acrolite.
Yeah.
But there's so much about the drum that it's never really. I mean, I've scribbled about it a lot, but I don't think I've ever seen a film about it.
No.
And maybe it's time to do it.
There's a huge interest in vintage stuff, and it's only growing as well, isn't it? You know, in the history of drums. I mean, my favorite snare drum, the Acrolite is high up there, but my favorite and go-to snare drum is a Beverly Cosmic 21.
Oh, right.
A brass one, and it's beautiful. It really is one of the rarer brass ones.
Do you know why it's called 21?
I believe I do. It was 21 quid, wasn't it?
It's 21 quid. That's what it was. Yeah.
Wonderful drum.
Yeah, it is, isn't it? And it's close. I was going to say it's close to a Premier, but I probably should say close to a Premier, but better.
Yeah, I think so, personally.
Yeah.
I
mean, there's a distinct possibility it was made in the same factory.
Yeah.
So that's another thing you don't see, Matt, very obvious often, is that the 400 wasn't made in the Ludwig factory. Mm-hmm. It was made in a place that did cauldrons, if that's the right word, and saucepans and everything, as you would.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I mean, for me, that's the fascinating thing about drums. And of course, guitars are fascinating, but maybe not. Well, for us, it's you and I, dare I say, could talk for 20 minutes about a nut and bolt and a screw. No, I'm not intending anything there, but we could, because we're drummers.
Absolutely.
But I don't think guitarists could.
No, it's a difference. It's just a difference. I mean, like drum clinics, for example, you don't really get those with guitars, do you? I'm sure you do in some form or other, but
I think they turn away from one another so they can't nick what they're doing.
Yeah.
Did I say that out loud?
Yes, it's fine. Don't worry. I don't think we'll get any watching this anyway. It's purely.
Nobody's going to watch it.
Purely drummers with no problem. But a good friend of mine is a guy called Rob Reiner, who plays drums for the Canadian heavy metal band Anvil. And I helped Rob out with something. I found him he wanted a Cosmic 21.
Did he?
And I found one over in the UK and shipped it over to Canada for him. And he's used that on I think they're recording their 19th album at the moment, and he's using a brass Cosmic. So, and he must have 50 or 60 snare drums, and that's the go-to drum. It's funny, isn't it? And you know.
Yeah. Well, Mattox has got, or he used to have 50 snare drums he took to the studio. Wow. And there is a slight problem with that, because any producer worth his salt is going to want to hear them all.
Yeah.
So even if you've only got 5, I only got 5, but even if you got 5, I would only bring the Acrolite out last.
Yeah.
I wouldn't bring it out first, because by the time we got to number 5, the producer would have forgotten about what the first one sounded like. So I always brought it out last, and it always got the gig. So it's weird, isn't it? Because it's not it was never an expensive drum.
No.
And yet it does the business.
It was a student drum, wasn't it? I think
it was. Yeah. It was cheap and cheerful. Yeah. Well, as cheap and cheerful as you could be.
Yeah. Great stuff. I mean, you know, back in the day, I mean, I've seen you. I'm lucky enough to see you play with the great John Verity, who is, in my mind, that's one of the best blues rock voices that's there today.
Yeah.
You know, that equals David Coverdale to my
ear.
And you were using quite a meager drum kit, but back in the Argent days, it could have been quite a sizable kit you were using, couldn't it?
It was. I mean, I had 2 bass drums.
Yeah.
An 18 and a 22, which I figured if I wouldn't have 2 tom-toms the same size, although that said, Premier did. And the 2 mounted toms were 14 by 12 or 14 by something weird. And I discovered from Eric Delaney that they were snare drums,
right,
with the snares taken off. And he had seen Louis Bellson with that setup, and he wanted it himself. And I discovered years after the event that my 18 and 22 had been emulated by Louis Bellson with a 22 and a 20.
Wow. So
I thought they were just 2 the same bass drums, but they weren't. He I think, like me, he felt, why would I have them the same size? That's crazy. So I didn't have them the same size, and as far as the kit was concerned, it was it grew exponentially as my excuse. But you know, I mean, if I could put a rototom somewhere, I would, you know, and I'd hit it eventually. And I had a gong. Of course, everybody had a gong. I had an orchestral bass drum for certain songs in Argent, which worked. It was a 28, and it sat behind me, and I sort of added to it as and when I needed stuff. I never got round to having 2 snare drums. That wasn't fashionable. Certainly not fashionable then. People would have thought I was mad.
Yeah.
Now, of course, you go and see Earth, Wind and Fire, and part of the song is played on a small snare drum, and part of it's played on a bigger one.
Exactly.
Anyway, like Garibaldi, that's what he has. I don't know if he started the fashion.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But I remember you had the crash cymbals that got gradually higher, didn't you?
Ah, yeah, it was a gliss.
And it was really a really great look.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it meant you could hit the top one and bring the stick down and get all of them in one hit.
Fabulous.
So that was. Oh, I had in the Kinks, I had 3 hi-hats, 3 pairs of hi-hats, and I figured, why would you know when you're playing on the hi-hat, you and I, and let's suggest we're playing on You Really Got Me. Well, when it goes to the next bit of You Really Got Me, we would always switch to the cymbal, because thinking that was where we should go, and the chug would disappear, so that actually was very filling has gone. So I decided if I could have 2 different sounds of hi-hats, that would be good. And by the way, I could get a pair of 10s, that would be good. So I had a 10-inch hi-hat with the Kinks, and it was the most subtle crash I've ever had. I mean, it was just, I mean, when you get a chance, try it, because it's the problem with crash cymbals and splash cymbals in particular is that they make a racket. They're not tasteful, no matter how you do it. But a pair of 10s hit just the right way, they work. You know, so it's, I mean, it's great. And and in the Kinks, I had an electronic. I must have had a claptrap. Claptrap was one of the Simmons claptraps that was used on a. It was used on a Kinks record. That's right. And I had a lot of electronic drums, and I did the sounds for Simmons on the SDX. Dave called and said, "Do you fancy going into the studio and recording a load of drums?" I said, "What are you going to do with them?" He said, "We're going to put them into the brain of SDX, which was the all singing, all dancing one." So I said, "Okay." So there now, anybody who's got an SDX, that's me.
Fantastic. Oh, amazing. Well, look, Bob, how did you know in Argent you had the different sized bass drums? How did you approach playing 2 different sized? Was it a different bass drum for a different song or part of a fill? Because I've never quite understood the concept of how you would utilize them, you know?
Well, okay, they were utilized mostly playing in unison.
Okay.
So they would both do the same thing at the same time. And so if you wanted a fatter bass drum sound, you just hit them both.
That's interesting.
And that's what, I mean, it was well, you know how this works. You're a drummer. Being a drummer consists of a lot of looking at the drum kit while people are working out chords and arrangements, isn't it? And you think, you know what, I could do that. And you know what, that rototom could have the foot pedal on it and all that sort of thing. So all my inventions came from sitting in a recording studio, waiting for my turn. And of course, the drummer that nobody loves is the one who, while everybody's trying to work out the chords and the arrangement, is thumping away. I mean, it's a real danger. You know, you can get guitars thrown at you if you're not careful. Did I say that out loud?
No. I mean, I just remember seeing that huge kit. I mean, Argent was an incredible band, wasn't it? It really was chock full of talent. You know, even before John Verity joined.
Yeah, well, funny enough, JV sent me some tapes, not some tape. What am I talking about? Sent me a computer, some stuff on my computer. Yeah. That was something that me, Jim, and John did when we were Phoenix, and it's really good. I mean, I'm saying it really is good. I mean, I look at there's a drum solo of me playing with Argent at the Palace Theatre in New York, and it's been online for years and years and years, and it was done in 1970, I think, maybe 71. And I look at it now and think, how did I do that? What was I thinking? That's fantastic. So anyway, we all move on with our playing. You know, we start out in playing, and it's like I was asked who was my favorite. I think it was Rhythm said who was my favorite drummer, and I said I don't have one. Mm. So this was Louise, and she said, "What do you mean? You must have one." I said, "I've got several, and they all pertain to a time in my life when I was listening to everybody that was there." Yeah. And I would listen to Al Jackson Jr. and I would play what he was playing, and I'd listen to Joe Morello and I'd play what Joe was playing, or I'd listen to anybody really. It's Tony Meehan, and I'd do what Tony was doing. So all of these guys became my faves, you know. But and Buddy Miles. I mean, Buddy Miles is I was going to say he's my all-time fave, but until somebody else comes along, he really did it for me. And for me, I love Mitch. Mitch was a jolly nice guy. Yeah. But I thought that Buddy Miles was better in the experience. Yeah. You know, with Hendrix than Mitch was. I mean, Buddy was meat and potatoes.
Far less busy.
Yeah. His hi-hat was I was trying to explain it to somebody. Instead of playing, I mean, there's ways to play the hi-hat that we could play. I don't know if you can hear that.
Yeah.
But Buddy Miles would play. It would really force the issue. Yeah. The time was the same, but he'd be moving the rhythm along, but by the way he was playing it. It wasn't playing it any louder or any softer. Sure. It just was his way of doing it. And I thought, it's great what he's doing. And the fact that he wrote them changes. Yeah. That's a good one, isn't it?
Talent. I like that. I like it. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You know, I forgot where we were going then.
Right.
I can't remember where we were going. Oh, that you were saying about your favorite drummers. I mean,
yeah.
And I read a lovely thing that Keith Moon cited you as one of his favorite drummers. Now, how about that for a compliment? You know, from
it was I knew him, and he lived around the corner from me.
Yeah,
I was in Winchmore Hill. He was down the road in Enfield, like maybe a mile away.
Yeah, and
he would come back from any of his favorite clubs, you know, pissed.
Yes,
and he would knock on my door. I was living in Winchmore Hill, and it'd be 3 o'clock in the morning or worse. And he'd knock on the door, and I'd open the door, and he'd say, "Dear boy, what about a cup of tea?" I said, "Keith, you know what the time is?" He said, "No, let's have a cup of tea." So he'd sit down at 3 or 4 in the morning, and I can't even remember what we talked about, and I bet he can't obviously, but I bet he couldn't remember it the next day. So we had a rapport, and he liked what I did, and I liked what he did. Yeah. He was the most natural drummer I've ever seen.
Yeah,
you know, he didn't care which. I mean, this is wearing your teacher's hat. He didn't care which hand was ready to at the end of a fill. Whichever one was nearer a cymbal would get the downbeat, and he'd crash the cymbal. So that was his way of doing it. And he was a splendid fella. And if he wanted to make you laugh, he would make you laugh. It didn't matter how long it took, he would make you laugh. If it was going to take an hour, he would work at it. And eventually you'd have to laugh. So he would knock on the door, and I'm sure we must have talked about something, probably drums. But I mean, he was getting into trouble all over the world in those days, you know. And funnily enough, I'll get this back in a minute. But if he threw a television out the window, it wasn't enough to just throw it out of the window. It had to be working all the way down. So he had to get coax so it was working, and it had to be electric. It had to be electrified. So
Extension leads and all sorts of things.
Yeah, he was daft, but he wasn't silly. You know, he certainly wasn't insane. You know, he would think about anything. We got off a plane once, and we'd been in Rotterdam, and who were on the same plane, and Mooney kept giving me drinks, as you do, and at the end they got off in front of us, and by the time I got up to the door, the stewardess, I think they were called stewardesses in those days, said, "Mr. Henrit?" I said, "Yeah." "Oh, Mr. She had something behind her back. She said, "Mr. Moon left this for you." And it was a corset, you know, the sort of things that a proper corset, red and black with suspenders and everything. And she gave it to me. Now, this woman, when I never got off this bike, was not a dolly bird. She was a proper type person, you know, a proper. I think she was a proper stewardess, and the fact that he managed to persuade her to take this and give it to me is hilarious. I don't know where it went.
Oh.
I certainly haven't got it anymore. It's a bit of a shame.
Isn't that incredible? It just, you know. Well, tell me, Bob, was his genius recognized at the time, you know, before he sadly passed away? Was it recognized then?
Well, no, I don't think it was. He was a flawed genius. Can I say that?
Yeah.
I mean, that summed him up for me.
Mm.
You know, and as I said, if he wanted to make you laugh, he'd just keep going. You may not know this story, but the Two Eyes was a club in the West End. It was in Soho, not more than half a mile from Drum Store.
Yeah.
And Mooney would come up to town and wander around. And he was going past the Two Eyes, and this was in the days when people would have stuff outside their shop, and he sorry about that. So he went to the Two Eyes, and outside the shop there was a coffee shop, and he pinched a couple of bags of coffee beans. Mm-hmm. And my pal was with him, the guy who was he was actually my partner in Drum Store. Yeah. He was with Mooney, and he said, "What are you going to do with those, Mooney?" He said, "I don't know." I said, "Why did you? I don't know." So they then walked to the underground at Leicester Square. Yeah. And got ready to go on the train. Didn't go down the escalator, but when they began the escalator there's the deepest in London. Mooney got out his beans and let them go down the middle of the escalator. You know that bit where they got the lamps and they've got mahogany and everything. So by the time it was rush hour, I probably ought to say that. By the time they got down to the bottom, these beans were traveling very fast, and people were trying to get on the up escalator, and they were tripping over and falling over all these beans. And I mean, that is genius, and but he I think, but he just didn't give it a thought. I mean, from nowhere, he said, I can slide all these beans down here. That'll be good, won't it? Genius. And it was for some people, I guess.
Oh, you know, we could, as you say, we could talk for hours and hours, and I don't want to put you through that. You know, we're in the evening, and but there's one thing when anyone mentions your name, obviously, fabulous playing aside, with all the fabulous artists and bands you've worked for with, I should say. But there's one thing that comes to mind, and I think I had this conversation with Steve Barney. By the way, Steve, thank you for putting Bob and I in touch.
He's a good kid.
He is. He's a good one. He's a good one. Yeah. So thank you, Steve. And this is your weighted string.
Oh, did he tell you about that?
Well, I actually saw you. Right. When I met you on the North Wales Blues and Soul Festival when you were playing with John. I think you were actually using the house drum kit, using the backline.
Oh, I was. Yeah. We always would if we could.
Yeah, and I remember you bringing out this piece of string, and I was instantly fascinated. As you know, drummers have a natural, what's that? What's this do? And you told me all about it. Just, I mean, it's a genius idea. Is it your own idea, or
It is, yeah. I was doing so much playing on other drum kits. I forget who this. I was probably with Don McLean, and I thought I wanted a quick way of setting up a drum kit that wasn't, that wasn't too complicated. So I hit on the idea of a bit of string with a drum key on the other end to weight it and to make it worthwhile. And I would dangle, and I put knots for the stool height, and another knot for the snare drum height, and another knot for the hi-hat height, and another knot for the ride cymbal and the crash cymbal, and the toms. And it was a piece of cake to set up this. You set your drum kit up in no time at all. Whereas, because of the thing about being using somebody else's drum kit, a house drum kit, is there's never time not to really get it right. So most of the time, you're desperately trying to get the snare drum right. Sure. When you're playing.
Yeah.
So I figured, how can I make money for this? I mean, it's just such a great idea, especially for people who are kit sharing.
Yeah.
But that's it's not much of a claim to fame, but I thought it was very clever.
But it's the most simple idea in the world, isn't it? And
it is.
But is it though? What, if it's simple, why hasn't everyone else thought of it?
I don't know. There's a piece of wire that goes from the hi-hat round the stool to the bass drum pedal, or to the bass drum itself.
Okay.
So that the bass drum doesn't move.
Yeah.
And somebody's got a patent on that, and in America, patents cost you £1,000.
Yeah.
Or maybe $1,000, but it's not the greatest of protection. But that's what people do. I found when I was writing for, I think I must have written for rhythm with it, and I discovered an electronic drum kit that you pedaled to make the electricity, so that you could actually hear what you were doing.
So you're using your feet to pedal.
When you probably don't know, but I invented the trap. No, I didn't. Yeah, I did. I invented the flats kit.
Yes, I did.
And then the traps kit came after that. But I had a phone call from a guy somewhere in the middle of America, and said, I've been looking at the flats kit, and he said, I'd like to tell you what I'm up to. I said, go on then. He said, well, me and some pals are going from Cleveland to South America on bikes. I said, right, yeah, of course you are. And he said, and so we're going on bikes, and what we plan to do is to get the audience to pedal the bikes to make some electricity so the guitars will work. And he said, and I want to build a drum kit around a bike. So I want a flats kit that I can actually pedal around the world. And this guy's name was something like John Kipkano, and or something like that. And his parents were into running, which is where they got. He's probably Kipkano Smith or something like that. Sure. But he went, and he said, do you want to come? I said, how long are you going to be away? He said, 3 years. Thanks a lot. I said, well, I'd love to come for 3 years, but I can't. And
that's incredible.
He was a very interesting guy, and I don't know whether he did it or not. I'd like to think that he did. But anyway, can you imagine the bass drum was one wheel, or the bass drum was between the crossbar and the rest of the bike, and the toms would be on the handlebars, I suppose.
So he's essentially using the bike frame as a drum rack.
He was, yeah, and he didn't know anything about drum racks.
Wow, amazing, genius.
Yeah.
Another one.
yeah, another one, yeah.
Oh, look, Bob, this has been absolutely wonderful. It's gone exactly where I wanted it to go.
Oh, good.
We could, we could talk for an awful long time. There's a lot to talk about. You've had an incredible career. And you were saying you're hopefully going to be out on tour in October. Should everything line up?
Well, God willing, yeah, as we used to say. But yeah, if we can, we will. And if we can't, I shall be very disappointed. But there is an English, no, a British end that would come after the German thing that we're doing. So if the German thing didn't happen, then hopefully the British one would. Well, so that's what I'm crossing my fingers. We're rehearsing tomorrow, having a lot of fun. And this is with Russ Ballard, as I probably said.
Yes.
And onwards and upwards, really.
Indeed.
Regardless.
Absolutely. Bob, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to spend an hour with you. It really
You're
has.
very welcome. If you want to do it again, give us a shout. I mean, what I think is that all this information is going to get lost if we're not careful.
Yeah.
And there's already an element of Chinese whispers when somebody gets a story and changes it a little bit and then tells somebody else, and by the time it gets back to the original guy, it's nothing like it should be. Yeah. So that's Chinese whispers.
Exactly. It's a nice legacy, isn't it? You know, it's there. It's going to be there for a long time.
Well, that's why it's got to be. For me, it's got to be right. I mean, there are people out there who know more about you and me than we do. They are. I mean, they really are, and they would argue to the death that what they knew was better than what you knew. You know, about yourself.
Thank you, Bob. It's been a pleasure. It really has.
Very welcome, Matt.
Let's hope the tour goes ahead, and then let's hope we get to see you over in the UK, and hopefully I'll get along to see you. That would be good.
Okay, that would be grand. Yeah, okay.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thanks, Bob. Take care now. Bye-bye.